May I ask for a recorded vote?
You may. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk labeled as Flake number 3.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona, page 62, after line 2, insert the following new section, Section 609. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used for the Fossil Energy Research and Development Program of the Department of Energy.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
This amendment would prohibit funds from going to the Fossil Energy Research and Development Program. The Fossil Energy and Research and Development Program is set to receive nearly $500 million through this appropriation bill. The committee report recommends that no less than $25 million be used to continue research in certain areas, but we shouldn't have any money going to subsidize big oil. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentleman's amendment would eliminate funding for the Fossil Energy Research and Development Program, causing hundreds, if not thousands, of job losses and threatening our nation's ability to compete in a rapidly growing portion of the energy section. I may also note for the record, Mr. Chairman, that Arizona itself is dependent, I believe, close to 60% of its energy on fossil energy. So fossil energy is a part of the nation's equation, and we better be careful before we eliminate research and development. But let me say I appreciate in recognizing the gentleman's passion for cutting spending and spending that is duplicative. But this type of research is important, and I'd be happy to yield the ranking member for any time he may wish to consider.
And would want to join the chairman in his opposition, recognizing that 70% of our energy consumption comes from carbon fuels. It's very important for this government and for this nation to learn how to as efficiently and as effectively use them. And again, I think for that reason alone, we should oppose the gentleman's amendment. I appreciate the chairman yielding.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona.
I thank the gentleman. You know, with an energy resource as old as fossil energy, we're talking fossil fuels. We're talking big oil. We always hear from the other side of the aisle, quit subsidizing big oil. And here we are directly saying we're going to give them research. You know some of the companies that receive grants under this program? I think of the companies like Chevron or others to develop energy in the Gulf or whatever else. Why in the world are we subsidizing that? We're hearing that they have profits of billions and billions of dollars just in the quarter, not just the year. And yet here we are subsidizing them again to more efficiently use fossil energy. Now, fossil energy has been around a long time. It's not exactly the notion that no research goes into it. And it's going to be around for a lot longer still. Why in the world is the federal government saying we need to subsidize these companies who are conducting research in use and efficiency in fossil energy? If we can't cut here, again, where can we cut? If we're going to stand up for big oil when it comes to spending money here, then where can we cut? I'm just flabbergasted when I come down the floor and look at what we're funding and subsidizing here. But you know, when I hear the rhetoric about how we need to make sure that they're paying taxes and whatever else, I think they should. I think we ought to get rid of corporate subsidies, all these kind of corporate subsidies. But why in the world we're developing programs to spend billions of dollars overall, millions in this case, to help these for-profit companies that we blast on in one breath and then subsidize with the next? Where does it end, Mr. Chairman? If we can't cut here, where can we cut? Again, this is fossil energy. Been around a long time, will be around a long time. We don't need to subsidize it. And remember, every dollar we spend here is a dollar that we have borrowed from people across the country, from taxpayers, from investors, from venture capitalists, from others who would invest it far more wisely than we would here. The best allocation of capital resources is through the free market, not by government fiat or subsidy. We've learned that over time, but yet we persist in doing this time after time after time. I urge the adoption of the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
On this, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Denham of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section 6. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to implement Section 111B of Public Law 111-11.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, the underlying bill has already removed the funding for a program that is failing to show any positive results and has done more harm than good. The San Joaquin River Restoration Program continues to push forward on an ill-advised path of wasting water out to the ocean under the guise of saving salmon. What this amendment does is to prohibit the premature reintroduction of an endangered species into an uninhabitable river, a river biologists say is not ready for salmon, a program that is supposed to occur after the construction of fish screens and the completion of an environmental study, neither of which is complete. All Central Valley salmon runs are struggling to regain healthy numbers. This amendment ensures that bureaucrats don't purposely reduce the numbers of available salmon in other streams to plant them into the San Joaquin system and further threaten or endanger current runs. The Bureau of Reclamation needs to be provided with more time to complete the environmental studies and build the infrastructure required by the San Joaquin River Restoration Program before this river can sustain a salmon run. Finally, even the National Marine Fisheries Services has doubts about the success of reintroduction. Contained within the final draft of their reintroduction strategies, NIMS expressed concerns that the San Joaquin River Restoration Program will not complete necessary channel improvements for a successful reintroduction. Mr. Chair, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose, the gentleman from Indiana?
To rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to the amendment offered by my colleague from California. In 2009, Congress ratified the San Joaquin Settlement Act, which ended 18 years of litigation in the Central Valley of California over water. The agreement was supported by the previous administration and California's then Republican Governor Schwarzenegger. The federal authorizing legislation was initially co-sponsored by Congressman Pombo in the House and Senator Feinstein in the Senate. The underlying bill zeroes the $9 million request for the San Joaquin River Restoration Fund and rescinds the $66 million in mandatory funds for these activities. As we stand on the House floor today, we are undermining this agreement, which, if it were to stand, that is the amendment, will land this case simply back into court. If the court is forced to take over river restoration, the Friant water users would be at risk of losing over 20 years of water supply certainty provided by the settlement. The amendment, I believe, is an attempt to end the broadly supported and bipartisan effort to restore the river while also improving water supply management, flood protection, and water quality. The amendment is piling on, if you would, given that the vast majority of funding for the settlement has been cut. There is no need to eliminate all funding just to ensure water attorneys can make a few more boatloads of payments. As I said at the outset, I strongly oppose the gentleman's amendment and would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California.
Reclaiming my Mr. Chair, it's apparent that the gentleman from Indiana just apparently has not seen the river in my area or simply just doesn't understand its flows. But to take an endangered species from Northern California, truck it down to the Central Valley, put it into a river that does not have fish screens, that does not have fish ladders, that does not have the environmental study, just to watch these fish die is not only irresponsible, but it's a waste of money. So I would invite the gentleman from Indiana to come visit us any time, but certainly don't make the mistake of killing an endangered species. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
I understand I have the right to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
I would urge the adoption of the amendment. Yield back.
The question is on the amendment
Chairman?
offered by the... Oh, I'm sorry.
In closing, I would again point out that in 2009, Congress ratified this settlement to end 18 years of litigation. I do not think we should adopt the amendment and potentially begin another 18 years of litigation, and would ask my colleagues to oppose the amendment. I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. For the Corps of Engineers Civil Construction, there is hereby appropriated, and the amount otherwise provided by this Act for the Corps of Engineers civil expenses is hereby reduced by $1 million.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer this bipartisan amendment with my fellow Louisiana colleague, Democratic Congressman Cedric Richmond. And what our amendment does is it transfers $1 million out of the Corps of Engineers expense account and into the Corps' construction account for critical coastal restoration efforts. And if you look at what we're dealing with here, what we're trying to address, not only can we maintain fiscal responsibility, but we need to also maintain and restore America's wetlands. And just what is happening to America's wetlands, what are we trying to address with this amendment? Louisiana alone has lost 25 square miles of coastal wetlands every year. And I want to hold up this football to represent that every single hour, Mr. Chairman, every single hour, the state of Louisiana alone loses an entire football field of land, that's eroded away. And what exactly does that wetland, America's wetland, protect that's eroding away? I want to show a chart here of the oil and gas infrastructure, the pipelines that move America's energy throughout the country. In the Gulf Coast alone, just in Louisiana, we produce about 1/3 of America's energy. And we talk all the time about our interest in reducing our country's dependence on foreign oil, and I strongly support that effort. And in fact, Louisiana is at the forefront of doing that, but that energy that we produce, and we ought to be producing more of it, we have the opportunity to produce more, but the energy we do produce is distributed throughout the entire country through pipelines that are in jeopardy right now because of that erosion of our coast, this wetland in America. Now, not only is it the oil and gas infrastructure that's at risk, but also seafood production. The Gulf Coast of Louisiana, we produce 1/3 of the country's seafood. And, you know, just looking at this chart makes me hungry when you look at the oysters and the crabs and the fish, this great product that we produce off of our coast. But all of that comes from America's wetland, from that wetland that's evaporating, eroding away, and we're bringing a bipartisan amendment to stop that from happening. And Louisiana's put its own skin in the game to the tune of over $1 billion of money that Louisiana's put in. But there's a project that was authorized by this Congress, because this is a national issue. And in fact, Congress has recognized this as an issue that shouldn't just be left up to Louisiana, because we're talking about something that protects and serves the entire country, and that's why in 2007 the LCA project was authorized by Congress. And all we're trying to do is keep that project alive, moving $1 million from the expense account over into the Corps' construction account, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
In reluctant opposition. First of all, I want to commend the gentleman for his advocacy for coastal restoration and, shall we say, literally carrying the ball for coastal recreation, and for his remarkable props. We know on this committee what a high priority it is for his district and his state, and may I thank him also for coming to the floor earlier to make a case, obviously, for controlling spending, but also doing some things that are very important to his constituents and others affected by the devastating floods. I want to commend him for his strong advocacy. The bill before us includes more than $16 million, or more than 15% of the entire investigations account, to continue work on coastal restoration through studies, engineering, and design on various components of the program. The committee had to make some tough choices in the bill, though. And although the Corps of Engineers construction account is increased $86 million above the President's request, let me say above the President's request, it is still a reduction from fiscal year 2011. The Corps had numerous projects under construction that were not included in the President's budget request, and so are unlikely to be funded in fiscal year 2012. While construction funding is trending downward, I believe it is most prudent to prioritize funding for these ongoing projects so that they can be completed and the federal government can realize some benefits from previous spending, rather than starting new projects, as important as they are. And even given that this project is currently authorized at approaching $2 billion and may continue to grow, it would not be prudent to begin another major new project while we have so many existing commitments. So for these reasons, I must oppose the amendment, but sympathize with the gentleman for the purposes of which he's here, and yield to the ranking for his comments.
I appreciate the chairman for yielding, and also would use the word reluctantly, because I understand the need that the gentleman has in his region of this country. Appreciate his efforts in this regard. But again, I do support the chair's policy as far as no new starts, given the fact that over the last several years we've terminated hundreds of ongoing projects. This is going to be a significant cost, and until we can have the intestinal fortitude with the administration to provide the necessary funds for ongoing projects alone, it's difficult to begin a new endeavor. The gentleman indicated his efforts to increase the request made by the President. Despite his best efforts to add money to the bill, we're now $677 million below what we were spending on water projects in this country in fiscal year 2010. So again, with all reluctance, I'm constrained to join my chairman in opposition. Thank you for yielding.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the interest by both gentlemen in dealing with the backlog that the Corps currently has. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why, when I worked closely with my colleague from New Orleans, Cedric Richmond, on this amendment, we first of all made sure not to take anything away from existing projects. So those existing projects in the pipeline are not affected at all by this amendment. And in fact, the Corps' overall budget is not increased by our amendment. And we worked very hard to get to that point, that we weren't taking away from those other vital projects, but pointing out that this is not a Louisiana-specific issue. This is a national issue. And as we talked about that pipeline, that series of pipelines that goes throughout the entire country to supply the energy needs of our nation. And we talk about the seafood production and the things that make our Gulf seafood so appetizing to people all around the country and around the world. But I also want to go back to this football and talk about the football field of land that erodes every hour. Just the last hour we've been sitting here, an entire football field of America's wetlands has eroded away, and we can reverse that trend without taking away from any other projects. And I understand the importance of that, and like I said, that's why we work so hard to put the amendment together in the way that we did, and I would urge adoption from all of my colleagues and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, on that I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. I believe it's number 81 as recorded in the congressional record.
The clerk will report the amendment. Designate.
Amendment number 81, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment eliminates funding to the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. We should be developing the vast quantities of proven energy resources readily available in this country, but instead the government continues to subsidize green technologies that are not yet ready to be used wide scale. They are neither efficient nor affordable, and federal agencies should not be in the business of picking winners and losers. If these technologies were viable, the federal government would not need to give them handouts, and instead they would be able to succeed on their own. Further, this legislation provides millions of dollars of foreign assistance to countries like China and India to implement renewable energy programs. At a time when our nation is broke, and we are broke, why are we sending taxpayer money to our foreign competition? I urge support of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would point out to my colleagues that the amendment, as stated by the gentleman, would eliminate all funding for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. The bill already includes a reduction of $491 million from the current year level, which is a 25% cut. The debate relative to energy policy in this House, not necessarily restricted to this amendment, talks about subsidies. But there's two parts to a federal budget. There are spending side issues and there are revenue and tax side issues. I would hazard a guess as we stand here that there is not an energy source in the United States of America, be it coal, be it nuclear, be it gas, be it solar, be it wind, that does not somehow receive some benefit either by lost revenue or direct spending of the federal government in its endeavors. What we do have to do is necessary research to make sure that we do expand the mix of energy utilization in this country, and certainly that is the purpose for the Renewable Energy Program research at the national level. With 70% of our energy now generated through coal or natural gas, this cannot continue. As I have said in earlier debates during the week, my senior senator from Indiana, Senator Lugar, has always described our energy problem as a national security issue, given where petroleum products tend to be bought in the United States of America. Without this type of very serious research, we're not going to solve that national security problem, and we are not going to assiduously create job opportunities and economic opportunities, and so would respectfully object and oppose the gentleman's amendment, and would be happy to yield to Mr. Lewis.
I appreciate my colleague yielding, and very briefly, while I'm very respectful of my colleague's attempt here to do what he can to pare back on spending, this is a very important area of our committee's responsibility. The amendment would totally eliminate funding for energy efficiency and renewable energy. It is a step too far, and while I associate myself with the remarks of my colleague and reluctantly oppose the amendment.
Appreciate it, and would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
I appreciate the gentleman from Indiana's comments, and I submit that the best way to make sure that we have that national security that my colleague from Indiana was talking about is for us to open up all of our God-given resources for energy here in this country. And we're not doing that. Mr. Chairman, we need to start doing everything we can to develop every energy source that we have, and I believe in all of the above energy policy. And the best way to determine what energy policy is going to be viable and is best for America is by letting the marketplace work. I believe in the brilliance of the marketplace. The marketplace, unencumbered by taxes, regulation, as well as by the government, and free from the government meddling in the marketplace by picking winners or losers, is the best way to develop those drastically needed energy resources. And I believe in renewable energy. But is it viable economically? And is this country going to be viable economically if we continue spending like we've been spending? And in fact, many members of Congress seem to have the idea that this country is going to just totally dry up and blow away if the federal government doesn't supply everything to every entity's needs. I hear over and over again from colleagues that they want to continue this spending and that spending. In fact, in the committees, I serve on 3 committees, I hear my colleagues, particularly on the other side, talk about we have a tremendous debt that we need to deal with. But it reminds me, as I hear them also talking about not cutting programs, reminds me of an old saying back from our founding era when our founding fathers were talking about the discussion in taxes. Today's mantra is, don't cut me, don't cut thee, cut the fellow behind the tree. Well, there's nobody behind the tree. I believe we're in an economic emergency as a nation, and Congress needs to face the fact we're headed towards an economic collapse as a nation. We've got to stop picking winners and losers and let the marketplace do that. Let people vote with their dollars instead of us funding this and not funding that, subsidizing this and not subsidizing that. The best way to do these things, the best way to figure out who should be the winner and loser, is let the marketplace do what it does best. And let people vote with their dollars. Let people invest in things that make sense and not invest in those that doesn't make sense. And we've got a lot of renewables, such as this corn-based ethanol, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense economically. It doesn't make sense even from an energy perspective. In fact, I'm a good Southern boy. I love my grits and cornbread, and it makes absolutely no sense for me to be burning up my grits and cornbread, driving down the road, putting it in the gas tank of my GMC Yukon. So we need to let the marketplace do its thing. And we need to reel in the spending that Republicans and Democrats alike over the last several decades have been growing the size and scope of government. So I encourage people to, my colleagues on both sides, to support this amendment. It makes sense economically.
It's expired.
And I yield back the balance of my time.
I would urge a no vote and yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose?
I move to strike the requisite number of words. I would just point out that there are no amendments left on our side that I know of, and I hope that your side can be more expeditious on here. Thank you. But some of us have important ball games.
This gentleman yield back? Does the gentleman yield back?
I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. It's number 63, as recorded in the congressional record.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 63, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be expeditious and comply with my friend from Washington's request to not delay this. This amendment simply prohibits the Department of Energy from spending money to implement the Vehicles Technologies Deployment Sub-Program within the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energies Clean Cities Program. Earlier, I offered an amendment to cut funding from this program and transfer it into the spending reduction account. As I mentioned before, when I presented my previous amendment, it is not appropriate for the federal government to be spending dollars on programs that the private sector should be doing or that local and state government can do. This program, this Vehicle Technologies Deployment Subprogram, is corporate welfare. I remind my friends, this is corporate welfare. And in fact, I've heard over and over from my friends on the Democrat side that we need to stop doing corporate welfare, and I hope that they will support this amendment, because that's what this simply is. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment of the gentleman from Georgia would prohibit funds for the vehicle technology activities at the Department of Energy that work with cities across the country to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. The gentleman should know that the committee closely evaluated the alternative fuels program and slashed it to $202 million below the budget request, leaving only $26 million that we found to be well justified. So we are making some progress. We're making some tough decisions, and even though the gentleman's heart is in the right place, we do need the $26 million to continue the program, and thus I oppose the gentleman's amendment, albeit reluctantly. Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the committee's cutting this program down to the $26 million. But again, this is corporate welfare. The Fortune 100 companies, many that get these funds, we do need to reduce this country's dependence upon foreign oil, but this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to open up exploration of our own energy resources here in America. This is a common sense amendment to strike out about $26.5 million out of funding that we just simply don't have. It's money that we're borrowing from our foreign competitors as well as here in this country, and it's creating more and more debt. So I urge passage of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman, Georgia.
Request the recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Is the gentleman offering the one number 27 in the record?
Is the gentleman offering the amendment number 27 that's printed in the record?
Yes.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 27, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Flores of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to offer my amendment, which would address another restrictive and misguided federal regulation. Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act prevents federal agencies from entering into contracts for the procurement of an alternative fuel unless its life cycle greenhouse gas emissions are less than or equal to emissions from conventional fuel produced from conventional petroleum resources. Simply put, my amendment would stop the government from enforcing this ban on federal agencies funded by the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill. The initial purpose of Section 526 was to stifle the Defense Department's plans to buy and develop coal-based or coal-to-liquids jet fuels based on the opinion of environmentalists that coal-based jet fuel produces more greenhouse gas emissions than traditional petroleum. I recently offered my similar amendments to the Milcon VA, Ag, and DOD appropriations bills, and each time those amendments passed this House by voice votes. My friend Mr. Conaway also had language added to the Defense Authorization Bill to exempt the Defense Department from this burdensome regulation. But Section 526's ban on fuel choice applies to all federal agencies, not just the Defense Department. That is why I'm offering it again today. Federal agencies should not be burdened with wasting their time studying fuel emissions when there is a simple fix, and that's not restricting their fuel choices based on extreme environmental views, policies, and regulations like Section 526. With increasing competition from other countries for energy and fuel resources and the continued volatility and instability in the Middle East, it is more important than ever for our country to become more energy independent and to further develop and produce our domestic energy resources. Placing restrictions on federal agencies' fuel choices is an unacceptable precedent to set in regard to America's energy independence and its energy policy. Mr. Chairman, Section 526 makes our nation more dependent on Middle East oil. Stopping the impact of Section 526 will help us promote American energy, improve the American economy, and create American jobs. I urge my colleagues to support passage of this common sense amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, appreciate that. Section 526, I believe, is a common sense provision that stops federal agencies from wasting taxpayers' dollars on new alternative fuels that are dirtier and more polluting than the fuels we use today. The section simply bars agencies from entering into contracts to purchase alternative and unconventional fuels that emit more carbon pollution than conventional fuels on a life cycle basis. I think that is just a rational common sense requirement. The effect of this provision that has been in place is a spur development of advanced biofuels. These fuels are being successfully tested and proven today on U.S. Navy planes at supersonic speeds, and I believe it is a testament to American ingenuity. I think the path that the gentleman wants to pursue is the wrong one, and it is unsustainable in the longer term, and it will not lead us to energy security, and therefore I am opposed to his amendment and would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman, for what purpose?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm prepared to accept the gentleman from Texas amendment. His amendment strengthens our national security by allowing the federal government to purchase more alternatives to imported petroleum fuels. More than half of the oil in the nation consumed each year is imported, as we know, and today the price of gasoline is hovering around the $4 a gallon mark. By declaring some new fuel options to be off limits, Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 limits our nation's ability to reduce its dependence on oil imports. His amendment puts all alternatives back on the table, which I think is needed, so the nation can begin to developing and using fuels that are made with resources from here in the United States. Energy self-sufficiency is a national security issue, and this amendment takes us in the right direction. I'm pleased to support the gentleman's amendment, and I yield back, or yield. Okay.
The gentleman from Washington.
I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
I would just like to know how much time the gentleman from Texas has remaining.
How much time? 2.5 minutes.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
I want to respond to the to what my amendment really does. And let me read a letter from the Department of Defense General Counsel to Senator Inhofe from July of 2008. And I quote, "It creates uncertainty about what fuels DOD can procure and will discourage the development of new sources, particularly reliable domestic sources of energy supplies for the armed forces." Unquote. Let me go on. Let me give you a practical, real-world example as to what Section 526 does. Our closest neighbor with stable energy supplies is Canada. And we import 650,000 plus barrels a day of oil that is produced from oil sands in Canada. And that oil makes its way throughout the refinery system throughout the United States and gets blended into jet fuels, gasoline, and diesel fuel. A literal interpretation of Section 526 would say that the U.S. military, the United States government more broadly, cannot utilize any of those fuels. There's no technical or commercial way that the military, the United States government, can make sure it is not using any fuel source that came from that crude oil. Let me go on and wrap up like this. You're going to hear a lot of remarks from the other side of the aisle regarding the claims about Section 526 or about my amendment. My amendment does nothing to remove the ability of the federal government to use alternative fuel sources. It can use whatever fuel source it wants to under my amendment. Section 526 increases our reliance on Middle Eastern oil. It hurts our military readiness, its national security, and its energy security. It prevents the increased use of safe, clean, and efficient North American oil and gas. It increases the cost of American food and energy, and it hurts American jobs and the American economy. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Indiana.
If I could ask the author of the amendment just one question on the letter. Was that a letter from Senator Inhofe to the Department of Energy or from the Department of Energy to the Senator?
It's from the Department of Defense to Senator Inhofe.
I appreciate the clarification. Remain opposed to the gentleman's amendment and yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the The clerk would designate the amendment.
Amendment number 75, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Young of Indiana.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Young, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I might consume. Our nation's unemployment rate currently sits at 9.2%, a full 1.6% higher than when President Obama took office. I'm hearing from my southern Indiana constituents, and I've heard this for months now, that the President's failed experiment of spending our way to prosperity and creating great uncertainty about future tax rates and interest rates must end. All right, now, sir. A step in the right direction would be supporting this modest amendment, which my esteemed colleague from Indiana, Mr. Burton, and I have worked on together. The amendment would merely restore eligibility criteria for the Weatherization Assistance Program to pre-stimulus levels. Now, by way of background, prior to 2008, the Weatherization Assistance Program enabled families at or below the 150% poverty level to reduce their energy bills by making their homes more energy efficient. Since the stimulus bill increased this eligibility threshold, the Weatherization Fund has exploded and currently has accumulated an estimated $1.5 billion in unspent funds. Moreover, the program has been a model of government waste and inefficiency. Late last year, for example, New Jersey's state auditor audited just $614,000 worth of weatherization funds that were dispersed in his state. He found that $33,000 of this $614,000 that were spent actually went to no services at all. So over 5% of the funds that were spent in that state were spent on nothing. This sort of waste and inefficiency, no doubt, is being seen all across the country. We've seen recent audits of weatherization programs in Illinois, Delaware, Tennessee, and Texas yield similar results. Now, personally, I agree with those who say that most Americans already have sufficient incentive and means to reduce their energy bills by weatherizing their own homes, and the government lacks sufficient incentives to spend our tax dollars responsibly. And that's why we should adopt this modest amendment, which would merely limit this program to our neediest citizens by restoring eligibility criteria back to pre-stimulus levels. So I would say let's improve our climate for private sector job creation however we can. Let's eliminate wasteful and non-essential spending wherever we can find it. That's what this amendment does. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
Gentleman would yield on his time.
Yes, sir.
We accept the amendment.
Yes, sir.
We accept the amendment as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 76, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana.
Pursuant to the order of the House of the day, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is simple. It prevents the misuse of recess appointments while preserving the founder's intent by allowing the President to quickly make emergency recess appointments if the need arises. Now, I know this may surprise many members, but current law actually prohibits the salaries of recess appointees. There was a law passed in 1863 that stayed on the books until 1940 that would prohibit those who receive recess appointments from being paid until 1940, and then some exceptions were made, and those exceptions basically took the intent of the law out. And so these exceptions, these loopholes are so broad that they make the prohibition against recess appointments useless, and the administration can always find a way to make these recess appointments. So I yield back and reserve the balance of
Gentleman from Louisiana reserves his time. Gentleman from Indiana.
I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
For 5 minutes.
Chairman, I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. These are legal appointments made by the President of the United States. This President, the last President, the President before that, the President back to George Washington. It is the administration's priority to make these appointments. And while each of us or collectively disagree with some of the individuals put into particular positions, until we change the law, the House should not pick and choose the staff for the executive branch any more than they should be picking ours. If the gentleman wants to say in the President's hires and appointments, I suggest he work to change the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2 gives the Senate say over presidential appointments and gives the President power to make recess appointments. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the amendment and would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Louisiana.
I don't argue the legality of the President's recess appointments. However, what I do is I am simply doing what many Congresses have done prior, all the way since 1860, when they realized that this is a problem when presidents and administrations try to bypass the will of the people. I'm simply using the power of this House, which is the power of the purse, to make sure that when the President makes recess appointments, look, this isn't the 1800s anymore. Congress is not out for months and months at a time. If the President needs to make an appointment in an emergency, he certainly has the time, and he will be able to take that recess appointment and put it before the Senate. I'm simply saying that until that recess appointee is confirmed by the Senate, he or she shall not receive any pay. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Indiana.
I understand I have the right to close, Mr. Chairman.
That's correct. The gentleman is correct. Gentleman from Louisiana.
Yeah, I will simply close by saying, look, my friends across the aisle have spent most of the past month talking about closing loopholes. And so I hope they will join me in protecting the taxpayer in closing the loopholes in the law that currently exists, and that is to bring the law back to the intent of it, which is to prohibit recess appointees from receiving salaries until they are confirmed. And so I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Indiana.
Chairman, this is a constitutional issue. We have no business in it, and I would urge my colleagues to vote against the gentleman's amendment, and I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back all time. Having expired the questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana, those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Louisiana.
For recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana will be postponed. What's next? Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman, could gentlelady kindly specify the amendment?
Yes, it is Blackburn 24, the 5%.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Blackburn of Tennessee. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. Each amount made available by this Act, other than an amount required to be made available by a provision of law, is hereby reduced by 5%.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentlelady from Tennessee and a member opposed each will be recognized for 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Energy and Water Development Appropriations Bill before us today includes $30.6 billion in funding. That falls $1 billion below last year's level and $5.9 billion beneath the President's budget request. I applaud our appropriators for the great work they have done in reducing this spending. I'm one of those members of the House that believes there is still room for improvement because we're in an extraordinary time when it comes to our budget and when it comes to the budget of this nation and the spending. And this extraordinary time does require some extraordinary measures. And that's why I'm introducing the 5% across-the-board spending reduction amendment. This amendment has the backing of 10 national conservative groups. This amendment would reduce the funding appropriated by this bill by an additional $1.5 billion and take federal spending back to just above the fiscal year 07 levels. Across-the-board spending cuts effectively control the growth and the costs of the federal government. They give agencies the flexibility to determine which expenses are necessary and which are not. In fact, in my state of Tennessee, as I have mentioned many times, as we have debated these across-the-board amendments, and Mr. Chairman, I know many of my colleagues are probably a little bit tired of hearing these across-the-board spending cuts, but we bring them forward because the states have used them, and they've used them successfully. A governor in my state of my colleague's party across the aisle made a 9% across-the-board spending reduction to bring that budget back into balance, to put our state on a firm fiscal footing. Our states who have balanced budget amendments take these actions, and they take them carefully, cautiously, and with an eye toward securing fiscal stability. It is time for us in Congress to begin to enact these very same measures, removing a nickel from a dollar. This is a way that we can help our departments find new efficiencies and to reform wasteful business practices. It would save taxpayers millions of dollars in the process. Indeed, if we had been doing this for years, we probably wouldn't find ourselves in the situation that we are right now. It's a step in the right direction. I encourage the support of my colleagues to the amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The lady reserves her time. Is the gentleman from New Jersey?
Mr. Chairman,
from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes in opposition to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to the gentlewoman from Tennessee's amendment. First of all, though, I do appreciate the fact that she recognizes that the committee made some tough choices. In fact, our overall bill is really down close to the 2006 level, but obviously in some quarters that doesn't satisfy every member of Congress, but I'm respectful of, obviously, her desire to go further. But cuts of this magnitude, quite honestly, go far too deep. And the type of things we do in our bill, our responsibility for the reliability of the nuclear stockpile, that's utmost. Our responsibility for cleaning up nuclear waste, where, in fact, there are consent decrees where things have to be cleaned up because of things left over from war research and development, which is important, and water issues. We heard for 2.5 hours earlier today that type of things can happen to our nation when water infrastructure is not kept up and modernized. Loss of human life, loss of livelihoods, tens of thousands of jobs. So I'm respectful of the gentlewoman's perspective, but in reality, this would be very damaging to our national security and to things that are important to life and property, and I'm happy to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Visclosky.
No, I think he has stated the case very well. I would also add the expenditures in this legislation on non-proliferation. I think one of the greatest threats our country faces is the issue of nuclear terrorism. So again, I think we have to be very thoughtful. The chairman has had to make some very serious and profound choices. I think he has done an excellent job doing so, and we ought to stop where we are. And I am opposed to the woman's amendment. I appreciate the gentleman for yielding.
Mr. Chairman, I yield that.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the comments that have been made, and I appreciate the work of the Appropriations Committee. And I do agree that the issues that are dealt with are important issues. I think so is the fiscal stability of this nation. That's a very crucial and very important issue that is laid before us at this time. So is sending a message to our constituents and to the taxpayers of this nation that, yes, indeed, we are going to require the bureaucracy to tighten its belt. One of the questions I'm most often asked by my constituents is, look, in our homes, in our businesses, in our churches, we're all tightening the belt. Why is the bureaucracy not tightening its belt? Why does Washington seem to be recession-proof? They want to see this bureaucracy engaged in this. They want to see the bureaucracy join us in the fight to put this nation on a firm fiscal footing. And when it comes to our nation's security, I would just remind my colleagues that on July 6, 2010, Admiral Mullen made the comment that the greatest threat to our national security is our nation's debt. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield back the balance.
Gentlelady yields back. All times expired. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Tennessee. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Tennessee will be postponed. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Blackburn of Tennessee. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. Each amount made available by this act, other than an amount required to be made available by a provision of law, is hereby reduced by 1%.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the chairman of the Appropriations for the time to speak on this and to bring this amendment forward. Again, this is a cut amendment. Every year I say let's look at 1%, 2%, 5%. Let's look at where to make these reductions. And I do it because I know that we all realize, and probably many of us in this chamber, agree with a sentiment that Ronald Reagan regularly expressed, and that is that the closest thing to immortal life on earth is a federal government program. And we're reminded of that fact today as we are here debating this funding bill. This amendment calls for a clean 1% across-the-board reduction in each account of this act. 1 penny on a dollar. We are doing this, yes, for today, yes, to send a message to constituents that we are working to reduce the spending, yes, to send a message to those that are watching the growing debt in this country, yes, a message that we are getting the fiscal house in order, but we are also doing it for our children and our grandchildren to make certain that they have an America that is strong, that is safe, that has its fiscal house in order. We are in a time where every child that is born in this nation is now seeing $46,000 worth of debt heaped on their head, federal debt that is theirs. It is so important that we make this cut. It's an extra $306 million that would come out of this budget. And as I said in my previous remarks, the appropriators have worked hard. They have worked diligently to make certain that they were reducing and coming in below last year's level, and they're to be commended to that. But these are extraordinary times, and it requires that we put the focus on going a step further, that we engage those that are running the bureaucracies, and that we have them go save a penny out of a dollar, and that they do it for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves her